We're live. We're actually live. We're here. We
Yeah,
didn't fix an intro, but we are live.
we are here. We definitely didn't forget to link StreamYard up to YouTube this time, so it's all good.
No, no, we were in time. We were in time. That linking time to YouTube, that was new. We've done a lot of this. Never had this issue before.
That's all good. It's all good. So, welcome
It
everybody
happened.
to this week's Cloud Native Weekly. It's great for you to join us, and it's great to be here. So, Wesley, how was your week?
My week was very warm. Apparently, we have, I don't know what kind of heat wave it is, but somewhere around 2 p.m., I really start sweating here at the office. It was good. Best thing last week, we had some of our colleagues, or most of our colleagues, fly over to the office, and then we had a big festival on Friday. We did some
Awesome.
laser tag, and we did lots of stuff. That was my highlight of the week. It took a weekend to recover, but it was my highlight of the week. Technical perspective, I did a lot of meetings in the past
Mhm.
couple of weeks, past this week as well. Did play around with some technologies that we're going to talk about today. Other than that, no, nothing very special. Just hoping that it will get a little drafty at some point. What about
Yeah,
you?
well, I wish it was drafty because it's been, I mean, for Ireland and for an Irish guy, it's been super hot here. And I shouldn't complain because it rains most of the year round, but, you know, it's been warm and, people like me just aren't built for the heat. So maybe need to do something about that. But this last week has been busy enough now. So, like you said, same for me, plenty of meetings. Plenty of talking to customers about modernizing their infrastructure and their application estate. And in my spare time, I've actually been doing quite a bit of Terraform and building like a Kubernetes or an AKS playground where eventually people can deploy it in the sandbox environments and just go and have a play with a well deployed AKS cluster. So not just one where it's just next, and it's wide open to the world and it's got security holes everywhere. So deployed with things like container insights, deployed with your API restricted and locked down and stuff like that, just so people can get in and get their hands dirty and have a play. So
I think I think at some point, because obviously you're camp Terraform, very cloud native, very cloud agnostic, even though same language but different syntax maybe for some stuff. We are
yep,
camp Bicep, Rich and I.
yep.
Richard can't be here because he took a day off. We don't understand why. No, Richard, enjoy your day off, mate. And we got this. We got your back. No, I think at some point we should have a bicep versus Terraform showdown. We've had some
like
discussions on it. There's no
like a
real
celebrity
winner.
like a celebrity death match type show where
Celebrity Death. Was that not with the Clay people on MTV at some
yeah,
point?
it was. Yeah.
About it, but
Am I aging myself terribly here by
our,
talking about
our,
celebrity deathmatch?
we're getting old. Definitely, the fact that we're talking about this. Um, yeah, and I think for your point, seeing clusters just deployed with what I like to call the next finish approach,
Yeah.
we come across those a lot. And
Hmm.
I think that's the whole challenge with Kubernetes. Yes, it's a very powerful platform. You can, even vanilla Kubernetes, there's definitely tools to deploy that quickly, but it's not really the security best practice. And might not even be the best performance best practice either.
Hmm.
It's more like, development engaged. We want to do containers. Let's do Kubernetes. Let's deploy it. Look, it works amazing. We have somewhat of a story on that when we look at Draft as well. But then you want to do production. You've got enterprise customers. You've got compliance. Where do you go?
Yeah. And that's where you end up having our developer friends doing almost shadow IT, and we're deploying something just to test and just to try and build and validate, and all of a sudden it's in production. So
Yeah.
my goal is to try and build out infrastructure as code and build out playgrounds that are configured in such a way as that it wouldn't be awful if it ended up in production, or it wouldn't need a lot of rework
Well,
or refactoring or whatever for the infrastructure. So yeah, I mean, I've been doing that a lot in my spare time because it's fun, it's interesting. Although, you know, fun and interesting for me anyway.
Yeah, I think for most of us. So then, are you focusing on security mainly, security networking? Is that where the problem usually is, or is it just
So what you tend to find is that, especially if you're just doing the next, I agree sort of deployment for most Azure resources, so not just AKS or Kubernetes, it doesn't deploy it with the most secure features in place. It doesn't deploy it with, say, by default the API, so the Kube API, the Kubernetes API that you're running your kubectl or your kube control commands against. That's open to the public internet, using a public endpoint. So one of the best wins or the quickest wins you can do is making sure you restrict that, to whatever public IP address you're accessing it from, and while making sure not to restrict your pods and your containers and your nodes from being able to access the API at the same time, which I did this week, and took me longer than it should have to realize what I'd done. But yeah, I mean, but that's the thing with cloud infrastructure and infrastructure in general. It doesn't always deploy in the most secure manner. So those are things you have to think about early on. Um,
yeah, I think that's probably my biggest learning in cloud in general in the past couple of years. Very easy to deploy in a couple of years' time. You grew some common sense in terms of security and all that stuff, compliance. All right, so we want to do the public cloud. We want to do as much standardization as we can, but let's put a little sauce on it to make it better.
yeah,
Um, in terms of news, so Cloud Native Weekly, we're going to talk about Draft in a couple of minutes. We want to keep this
yeah.
short so people can watch it quickly in between stuff. But let's do some news. Do you have some news that popped out for you?
Sure, I had a quick look around the various sites this morning, and in the interest of keeping this cloud agnostic, our first piece of news is from AWS. So we've seen in the last couple of weeks that AWS has container image signing. So if you go to that link, you can have a read about more about that. But container image signing helps you ensure that your clusters are only pulling signed container images, so authorized container images. So you're using your admission controllers in your Kubernetes clusters to ensure that you're only pulling container images from authorized places because they're signed. You know what they're about. On that note, that leads me on to a session that Josh Duffney gave at Microsoft Build there recently, where he talks about this, about signing container images and ratifying them and deploying them, so securing your container deployments. The video is very AKS focused, but the tooling he uses is open source, so it's transferable to anywhere you're running Kubernetes. So not just Azure, not just AWS or Google Cloud, but anywhere you're running Kubernetes, even in on-premises environments, because he demonstrates open source tooling there. So definitely worth checking that one out.
And then there's some Spot stuff happening on Microsoft Azure. I'm aware of Spot instances in general. No SLA, very cheap. You need to have a use case for it, but you're saying ACI is supporting this now.
So, yep, in the last day or two, Microsoft have said that ACI, so Azure Container Instances, for anybody that's not, for the uninitiated, are now compatible with Spot instances or Spot containers. So that then links in with the Azure Spot instance functionality, where you can basically make use of the spare capacity in the cloud under the understanding that it might just disappear or it might just be turned off. But that's a perfect use case, Wesley, for Azure Container Instances, because they're short-lived, they're quick. There's that quick serverless function where it just runs and then it's gone. So it's cheaper to use the Spot instances, and it lends itself to being that sort of ephemeral, quick running away again.
Yeah, and it's very cheap. We've seen it in different services. If your workload supports it, you can build something very, very cost efficient. Rini saying, "Hey, Karl, how you doing?"
Hi, Renee. Doing well, thank you. A bit too warm, but as I said at the top of the show, we shouldn't really complain about the weather in Ireland because it rains the rest of the time. So good to see you. Thanks for joining.
All right.
So one more piece of news then before we let you get into draft. So Dapper,
Dapper.
has its new release 1.11 within the last few days there, and that's now the configuration API version 1 is now stable. It's released a whole what looks like a shed load in these release notes of preview features, so definitely check that link out. And also interesting that it now supports Windows Server 2022 container images. So instead of just the what is now becoming more legacy Windows Server 1809. So that's good news if you're deploying anything with Dapper using Windows containers.
And for the for the people unaware of Dapper or have no idea what it's doing, we can have a multi-hour session on what you can do with Dapper, and we'll probably have to get some developers in, or maybe Mark Duggar knows almost everything about Dapper. And we need to get him in at some point. But Dapper is a distributed application runtime. Basically, what it provides you with, you said it earlier, is like the Lego blocks, the building blocks for being cloud agnostic or infrastructure agnostic, maybe even.
It's providing you it's providing you the building blocks or the Lego blocks, if we're not going to get done for copyright, but the Lego blocks to help you build distributed services so that you're not having to roll your own code to connect your different microservices together or connect your microservices to platform things like Service Bus or Key Vault or app configuration or anything like that. It's got those building blocks and stuff right there ready for you to use.
So one could argue multi-cloud Kubernetes, Dapper would probably be a requirement that you want to invest in.
Sure, because you're not writing your own code, you're not rolling your own integrations, your own connectivity to these third-party resources. So and it almost provides you with reading the docs on Dapper recently with that intermediate API sort of layer where your application just worries about talking to Dapper, and then Dapper being the intermediate, that Dapper then worries about talking to whatever's at the other side. So your Key Vault, so your app configuration or Service Bus or whatever. So it helps your distributed services, your microservices become more agnostic and certainly become more portable.
Yeah. All right. I think it's time to talk draft.
Yeah.
I think it was the last Azure Friday or two weeks ago. There was a good session from Scott Hanselman, Microsoft at Azure Friday. They talked about not really just draft or whichever area of the world you're from.
Whatever way you want to say it.
Getting a bit drafty here. No, so the AKS deployment they're showing, or the container or the deployment in general they're showing, is powered by Draft. It will help you create manifest. It will look at your application and then help you make some decisions to kickstart your Kubernetes deployment. We've got the demo to do it from the Azure portal, or just you can do it from VS Code. Lots of videos about that. I just want to bring it back to basics and just show you it's a command line tool as well. What I find is that it gets a lot of loving from a development perspective. It's very underestimated. If you really want to get started, and even us people working with Kubernetes every day, I still use it to quickly scaffold the things that I need based on the application. So it's a great Kickstarter, but you have to be careful. I'm going to try and add my thing to the screen. There we go. I think you can see my Hello World thing here.
Sure.
So what I'm going to do is quickly look into this directory, and what I've got is normally we do a lot of .NET. I thought, let's do something else. Let's do Node.js. Doesn't matter. Something different, something very cloud-native, something very, very not Azure. Let's do that. So it's just Node.js world thing. We're not even going to run it, but what you can see is I've got a Node.js application that provides the websites listening on port 8080 in this case. So listening on port 80, actually, that's what it says here. So what we're going to do is just run nothing complex, just do draft create. There's a GitHub link at the bottom of the screen. So
Yep.
here, there, yeah. And I
Sort of that
will
way.
show you how to install Draft and what you need to do. So I'm just going to run it, just Draft create. And it's going to ask me, all right, so I have detected JavaScript with a 95.7% probability. Now, that's nice that it gives you the probability. I'd say if you're a developer, you're running this, I really hope you know what language you wrote the code in. If not, Draft might be of little help. So please enter the port exposed in the application. I'm just going to go with the defaults, port 80. Which version? Let's just go with 14. I did nothing version specific in the Hello World. Actually, it's the Hello World copied from the Node.js website. And I can have a choice on which Kubernetes deployment type I want. Do I want to use Helm? Do I want to do customized? Do I want to do manifest? We're just going to go with manifest for now. And then, all right, so what for the application? Is it exposed? Because that will probably, hopefully, create a YAML for the service deployment that we want. Name of the application, let's call it Cloud Native Weekly Hello. I see that. Port again, port 80, that's the port for the service. Do we want to do a namespace? Normally, yes, you want to separate in different namespaces. We don't care about that. We're just going to go with default. We're not even going to deploy to Kubernetes. I just want to show you what this is generating.
Yep.
Please send the name of the image to use in the deployment. Let's assume that is what my image is called. Normally, probably want to do some other stuff. Tag, latest. That's what you don't want to do when you do ACR on Kubernetes. You don't want to do latest because you want to actually have versioning on your container images and you don't want to work with latest. You just don't want to do that. No. So it's done. It created something. I'm going to check. I can now see I have a Docker file. It says from node exposing the ports. It's copying the code in. It's doing an npm install, copying some stuff. Now, one could argue I have not tried it with this file. If I do a docker build dot, will it build? Well, I love live demos, so we're just going to...
Let's find out.
I did it. Yeah, copy failed, file not found, but you can see it's starting to run, so we'll get to this actually built and is working. If we do the manifests, so it creates you a Docker file, which you can modify, and you probably want to modify, but this is your Kickstarter. Yeah. This is the alternative to going into Google, looking, give me an example Docker file for Node.js, or give me an example Kubernetes manifest for Node.js. Now, if we look at this, we can see, let's read the service.yaml. It created a service for me, which I can deploy to Kubernetes. I can change it if I want to. I can also check the deployment. And as you can see here, we've got a Kubernetes manifest. We've got a deployment. It's going to label it. It's going to do one replica. And it's got a container and the image latest. So obviously, that's where you want to do a V1, V2, or a very nice semantic versioning. But then the question is, do I deploy this to production? Yes or no?
So no, not yet is probably the answer to that question. So this is a very good, like Wesley was saying, this is a very good foundation and a very good on-ramp to getting you started with a previously uncontainerized. I may have just made that word up, but a previously uncontainerized.
Uncontainerized. This is
non-containerized app.
Non-containerized.
Okay, so we'll stop making up words now. But this is getting you the on-ramp. This is getting you the foundations to allow you to start working with container orchestration and start deploying your application in a container orchestration technology like like Kubernetes or Red Hat OpenShift or something like that. You know, so this has got you that foundation in place, and the fact that it's smart enough to ask all of the questions that we've just seen it ask, but in particular about manifests versus customized versus Helm, it while it's not immediately production ready, it certainly has all of the starter tools and stuff that you need just to start moving in that right direction. Because on top of what Wesley's just shown, it can also help you generate GitHub action workflows for doing what Wesley attempted to do, but unfortunately failed, but doing the container build and the push to the container registry. And it also, although if we're using GitOps, I would encourage the use of GitOps and not having a GitHub action deploy your application for you. But every company and every team of developers is in a different place in that cycle, So it can also generate a workflow for building and putting it in a container registry, but also deploying your application to your cluster as well. So it's really, really powerful. And while I say what it's done here is not quite production ready, you can see that there's not much of a gap. There's not much of a jump between what it's trying to do and making it production ready. I mean, you're going to want to make sure you're doing a pass through these files and this implementation to make sure you're not deploying with root users and stuff like that. But I mean, you're fairly close here, right?
Yeah, no, you definitely are. I mean, for going to production, you want to probably, if your application can do it, you want to have multiple replicas.
Yep.
You probably want to have a security context. You want to have resources and limits configured. But I'd say if you're just quickly building something and testing it, let's say I've got some proof of concept code I want to deploy, I would just want to access it over the IP address. That's something you'll see in the video of Azure Friday as well. It's being accessed over, just the public IP. Great for dev testing. When you want to go to production, you probably want to do GitOps. But if you don't do GitOps, you still want to have some specialists take a look at what's happening here. But even specialists, and well, I'm not going to say we are specialists, but we do this quite often. It really helps just scaffold it and not having to go into another repo, copy what you did in the past, grab something from Stack Overflow. I mean, don't get me wrong, we all do it. We paste it into VS Code and then we try and run it. This will actually provide you with a working example. There are Visual Studio Code plugins for this as well. You can also do dry runs and see, would this work on your cluster? It's got so many features. Unfortunately, when we tell people or when we ask people, hey, do you use Draft? People often don't know what it is, which I think is a good thing that they built some of that stuff into the Azure portal for Azure Kubernetes servers. But this would be the go-to quick start for any technical person working with Kubernetes. Just use this, build on top of that.
Yeah, and you said there it's not Azure specific. This is relatively agnostic because, once you have your manifest, once you have your Docker file, your manifest, or your customize your Helm files, I mean, sure, you can deploy your application to any Kubernetes cluster running anywhere. So yes, it's created by Microsoft. But it's an open source tool, and it really is agnostic. So fill your boots, as we say here, get to grips with it, go and have a play. The video we have linked there, Wesley mentioned, was Azure Friday. So it's focusing on an Azure specific capability built on top of Azure Draft called automated deployments. It's in preview, so be careful if you're using it anywhere near production workloads, but it's built on top of Azure Draft, and Steve Buchanan joins Scott for just to go through, and it's an end-to-end demo from similar to what Wesley showed. It starts out at just a code base, and he runs the automated deployments, which runs Draft against it, and they have a functioning application. Excuse me.
Yeah.
So
you're right.
Well worth. Yep, sure am. Give me 1 second.
He's not all right. He's fine. He's fine. Nothing's happening.
Too excited talking about Kubernetes and Azure Draft. That's what it was.
Well, that's a good thing.
So
that's a good thing.
Yeah, Azure Draft, cloud agnostic, location agnostic. As long as it's running in Kubernetes, it's getting you that on ramp. And if you don't want to use workflows to deploy your application, it's giving you those manifests. It's giving you that customizing that Helm that you can drop into your GitOps workflow. So, like Wesley said, it's certainly, if you're doing a proof of concept or you're developing a new tool, it certainly gives you that foundation of those building blocks, to reference what we said about Dapper earlier, to get you started and reduce the time to proving the value.
Just reiterating or confirming what Karl is saying. If you look, just run draft -h -- help, you can see it, generate workflow, create is what we did. and it says add minimum required files to the directory. So that's what it does. That's what we've been saying. You want to add stuff on top of that. Yeah, it's got a lot. You can add additional configuration as well if you've got your configuration files. It's a very simple tool. It's a very, very powerful tool. All we can say is please use it. We recommend it. It's better than copy pasting stuff from the internet.
It's certainly better than copy and pasting someone else's code from the internet, certainly. But as with anything, and with any tooling that's automating anything for you, in the age of AI that we're now moving into, anything that's doing the work for you, make sure you double check what it's up to, and make sure that you're passing your eye over it to make sure that it's following your security best practices, and don't just assume it knows what it's up to.
Make sure you understand. I've seen kubectl examples from AI generated with parameters that did not exist.
Yeah,
I still use it. It's very powerful, but
yeah, AI is fantastic, and it's certainly a very useful and very powerful tool. But it's important that you know, not just AI, but with tools like Draft and anything that's easing your burden. Make sure you know what it's doing, and make sure you know that it's followed best practices.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
should probably do a session on that at some point.
Yeah,
I think that's it for this week, right? Hopefully, Rich is going to be here next. Is he going to be here next week?
I think so. Are we going to be here next week, or should he do a show?
We're going to be. Just to clarify for everyone, I mean, we're doing it with the three of us. Obviously, we can't always all be here on every Thursday, so we're always going to have some kind of round robin. Hopefully, the majority of the time, we're all going to be here. Yeah, because we just want to make fun of each other and laugh about stuff and that chat tag. I think that's what we love in general. Tomorrow we're going to tweet what we're going to talk about next week, right? We're going to have to do that tomorrow.
Yep, we have to decide first before we tweet, but yep, that can be done tomorrow. Right?
We will we will gather the committee. If you have any idea after watching this, we'll post this on Twitter for people to watch afterwards. End of day, we're going to make a decision on what we're going to talk about next week. So if you got input, please let us know. Any last famous Irish words about Cloud Native for today, Karl?
Just keep having fun, I suppose. Yep.
Keep having fun. Keep enjoying.
Yeah.
After this session, I see you have a fan in your office. I mean, I turned mine off because we're having a thing.
It's going on in about 30 seconds. Yep.
Exactly.
So,
same here.
Thanks everybody for joining us. Hopefully you found it useful. Check out some of the news links that we posted. Check out those videos from Josh and from Azure Friday that we posted, and get to grips with Azure Draft. See you next time.
Exactly. See you next time. Bye-bye.